For his entire life, Percy Reed felt out of place. From the first moment he touched a ball, Percy knew that he was born to be a football player, but growing up in a wealthy family with both a mother and a father who were respected academics and professors at Harvard University, athletic pursuits were never allowed to be his first priority. Percy was enrolled in an expensive private school meant to prep him for an Ivy League college where the most popular sports were lacrosse and fencing. He begged his parents to let him join his high school's football team and finally convinced them to let him join the team for his senior year. Percy was elated to finally have an outlet for his athleticism, and his coach quickly installed him into the team's offense as a potential star wide receiver. Taking the field for the first time, he felt like he was right where he was supposed to be. Coach had Percy starting off in the slot on his first drive, and coming across the field on a crossing route, he was able to lock down his first catch. Percy had pretty much never thrown a football in his life, but due to his athleticism, his coach decided to put in some packages for him to scramble around, and on third down, he was able to do just that, showing that he was a natural with a nasty spin move. It was already clear that Percy was a natural athlete, but on an ensuing second down, it became clear that he was not going to have much of a quarterback to throw him the ball. His team was going to have to find creative ways to get him the ball if they wanted to have a chance, and it seemed like jet touch passes and screen passes were going to be the move this season. On a 3rd and 5, his quarterback took forever to throw him the ball, but when he did, Percy had tons of space to work and showed off the wheels that he'd always known that he had, outrunning a DB and taking it all the way to the crib for a go-ahead touchdown, the first really big play of his career. With that, Percy's coach knew that he had something special in him, and he started to put him in at quarterback again. Sadly, his team wasn't quite able to pull out the dub, but after his big performance, Percy was already starting to get a little bit of attention from colleges, and his parents had been surprisingly supportive of his football season so far. They actually decided to show up for a second game, even though they had no interest in the sport at all, and he was determined to show out for both them and potentially some college scouts, and got off to a good start with a nice little catch on the sidelines. Percy's coach told him that if he wanted to be taken seriously as a college athlete, he'd have to show that he could make some catches downfield as well, and on the second drive of the game, his quarterback literally just threw it as far as he could, and Percy was able to get under it for a huge gain, the biggest play of his high school career thus far. Percy's team actually had the lead in the 3rd quarter, and trying to get creative, his coach put him in for an option play, but he got absolutely crushed. He was able to complete the pitch, but he knew that plays like that would make his parents nervous. He hoped he could avoid contact like that for the rest of the game, but his coach gave him the ball right back on a jet touch pass. Thankfully, he didn't have to worry about contact because the block set up perfectly, and Percy went untouched to the end zone, as it was becoming clear that he had the talent to put his crappy team on his back. He was enjoying having the option to play a little bit of quarterback, and he was honestly just scared to throw the ball at all, but it didn't matter. He was so fast, he was able to make the run game work. On second down, his coach put him back in at wide receiver though, and running a fake little screen pass, his quarterback threw an absolute moon ball that was pretty much completely uncatchable, so what could have been a touchdown turned into nothing. The drive was stalling out, and Percy decided to improvise and call for the ball, but that turned out to be a very bad idea because his quarterback just threw it right to the linebacker, and that was it for game 2. It wasn't looking like Percy's team was going to go too far in the playoffs or anything, but he was starting to garner some legitimate attention from colleges, even picking up a few scholarship offers. Percy had always been kind of an outsider at his school, but when people saw him on the football field, he started to become pretty popular. Unfortunately, he flew a little bit too close to the sun and got rejected from his homecoming proposal, which was very embarrassing. But at this point, Percy felt like he had bigger things than school to worry about. His normally perfect grades were starting to slip a little bit, and he was determined to get his team their first dub in many years despite his quarterback's inaccuracy. After a couple of sacks, his team was backed up to a 3rd and 17, but running a vertical route, he got into space, and his quarterback actually put the ball on the money. The block set up perfectly, and Percy continued to show that he was a playmaker. The defense his team was playing against that week actually wasn't really all that, and with Percy's coach putting him in at quarterback, he was able to find a lane beautifully up the middle and thought he was going to take it to the house, but actually got hawked down by a safety. That was a sign to him that he needed to continue to work on his speed, but it didn't matter. He was able to keep the ball himself and get into the end zone, and he was dominating out of the Wildcat package, continually showing that he was the most athletic player on the field. He had developed some nasty juke moves to accompany his speed. With just under 2 minutes left, Percy had worked his team down to the red zone, and on a 3rd down, his coach drew up the perfect screen to him, and he walked right into the end zone to give his team the win. The Orcas had their first dub of the last 3 years. With that performance, Percy continued to rack up offers, including one to Vanderbilt, which his parents were excited about, but despite the fact that he was getting attention from schools the likes of Syracuse, Percy was still getting pressure from his parents to apply to Ivy League schools, and they hoped that he would just play football at one of those. At this point, it was looking pretty unlikely that Percy's team would make the playoffs, but he continued to round out his game, making some tough contested catches, and with time taken down in the 4th quarter, his coach decided to trust him at quarterback, which, to be fair, he was a lot more trustworthy than the other option. So despite the fact that he didn't have any passing ability, he was hoping to grit out the drive. Time was starting to tick down though. On 1st and goal, coach decided to roll Percy out on a bootleg, and even though he had open receivers, the grass in front of him was even more open as he ran in for a game-winning touchdown, giving his team a pretty respectable 500 record. Just like that, it was senior night, and Percy was going to have to make a decision about where he wanted to go to college. He hadn't been able to rack up any offers from the schools at the top of his list, but he had interest from places like Vanderbilt and Duke. During Percy's senior night, the stands were packed in his football stadium for maybe the first time ever. People wanted to come out to see the first D1 recruit their school had had in decades. Percy was looking to once again make some big plays in this one, and early on, and his quarterback actually put it on the money for a big gain. Percy's quarterback was a mystery, man. Sometimes he threw the ball terribly, and sometimes he put it in the perfect place, just like on this play where Percy kind of freewheeled a little bit, but was able to turn it into a touchdown. And this was looking like it could be his best game ever. On the ensuing drive, his coach put him in the Wildcat, and it looked like this play was dead in the water, but Percy somehow got out of there with a spin move. At this point, Percy basically just was his team's entire offense, and he decided to throw the ball for the first time ever. His receiver was wide open, and it actually worked out, making it a 1st and goal for the Orcas. With only 13 seconds left on the clock, coach just gave Percy the ball and told him to score. Percy's team was unfortunately not putting on much of a defensive performance, but he got the ball back one more time with just a minute left and was able to get to the outside and break loose, capping off his high school career with yet another game-winning touchdown. Percy's team would go on to miss the playoffs, but he picked up some more D1 offers. His top 3 choices on signing day were still pretty prestigious in terms of academics. It was a tough decision, but Percy ultimately decided that he was going to take his talents to UNC, and he hoped that he would be able to help turn around Bill Belichick's struggling program. Percy's first few weeks with his new team were a culture shock to say the least. Most of his teammates didn't come from preppy academic backgrounds like he did, and he was a little bit of a misfit in the locker room. He definitely wasn't primed to be a star in his first season, as he came in at only a 63 overall. Percy might have been buried on the depth chart, but he was hoping to make an immediate impression on his coaches, and he quickly realized he had the skills to compete. A big part of why he hadn't been a big-time recruit was because he didn't get started till his senior season of high school, but in terms of raw ability, Percy was just as good as anybody on the team, and his teammates were already starting to compare him to the likes of players like Kadarius Toney, as he made some of the defenders look silly during practice. As at this point in his career, he was mostly just an improvisational receiver, with a lot of skills but not a ton of training. For his freshman season, Percy was just happy to be part of the team and get the chance to compete in practice, and while he didn't really fit in personality-wise with his teammates, they at least respected him for his athletic ability. Percy ultimately ended up redshirting his freshman year, as even in blowout games against lesser teams, he wasn't able to get any playing time. He was able to improve his skills a ton over the course of his freshman season, and with a ton of players leaving after Bill Belichick's unsuccessful second season, Percy was able to lock down the number 2 spot on the depth chart. He and his team were going to be taking on TCU in a night game in his first game as a redshirt freshman, and the crowd was looking like it'd be absolutely electric. Percy was so nervous to play in his first game that he threw up in the locker room before coming out of the tunnel, and he was playing outside receiver in this one, which was pretty uncomfortable for him, but he was able to come down with a nice catch early, and on the goal line, his quarterback decided to throw him the ball. The cornerback was right there, but Percy was able to come down with it, and he opened up his North Carolina career with a bang. He had greatly improved his possession receiving in practice during his freshman season, and it paid off. That play relaxed Percy's nerves quite a lot, and on his second drive, he confidently called for the ball going over the middle of the field. His quarterback made a beautiful throw on the run, and he was cooking in the first half. Having a quarterback who could actually throw him the ball was crazy for Percy, but he was still a little bit nervous and almost dropped this one that came right to him. On 2nd and goal, he was supposed to run a little curl route, but saw an opening, decided to improvise, and his quarterback found him perfectly in stride for his second touchdown of the half. Percy was having the game that he'd always dreamed of having as a kid, and it was starting to look like he was going to be one of the stars of this team as he got the ball in space on this drag route and showed off the juke moves a little bit. Down in the red zone, Percy was getting pressed, but he was able to break it easily, and his quarterback had him wide open for an insane 3rd touchdown of the day. It had become a dominant game. The team had the lead by 11 going into the 4th quarter, and at this point, the coaches realized that they just had to get Percy the ball any way that they could. And along with his dominance receiving the ball, Percy was also proving himself as a capable run blocker, sometimes even putting defenders on the ground. The game wasn't over yet though. Up 8, North Carolina had a 3rd and 17, but Percy was able to get open again and picked up the first down, almost getting up out of there for an even bigger gain too with the juke. That play pretty much sealed up an incredible game, and that would do it. Percy had unexpectedly established himself as the star of the team, His quarterback targeted him an absurd 19 times, and he was starting to wonder what kind of football player he'd be by now if he'd started playing a little bit sooner. It goes without saying that after that, Percy was able to have a position battle for wide receiver 1. I'm not even sure why the coaching staff felt the need to put him through this, but he was determined to lock down a number 1 spot and got off to a good start in this first drill, able to catch a touchdown pass over the middle. All he needed was one more big catch to win drill number 1, and getting the ball in a drag route, he was able to punch it in again for a touchdown. The first drill was a breeze, but the second one was a little bit more difficult. The number 1 receiver on the depth chart put up a tough score to beat, and even though Percy was able to finish things off by coming up with a nice touchdown on the corner route, it wasn't quite enough to get the win. The last drill was this goofy backfield survival drill, which actually turned out to be pretty tricky, but we are able to get that last box, and Percy has officially locked down the wide receiver 1 job. Unfortunately, in our next game against Charlotte, we somehow lost in overtime, 39-37. What the heck? And despite being wide receiver 1 for this game, Percy didn't have as crazy of a game, only 2 receptions for 23 yards. So far, Percy's doing pretty well in school. He's used to academic rigor, so UNC should be no problem. And Percy's parents still wanted him to focus on getting a degree. He's working on a tough major of biology and anthropology, so he's had to use a lot of his points on studying. And he and his team were able to get a huge blowout dub against UCF as the offense was balling out so far. So despite the tough early loss, Percy and his team found themselves at a pretty serviceable 3-1 record, and the home stadium was rocking again for a huge matchup against number 5 Clemson. This was the game that could put the Tar Heels in contention for the college football playoff, and after a couple of quiet games, Percy was determined to go crazy in this one, but a fumble from his fellow wide receiver early on put the team in a very bad spot. It was starting to look like if Percy didn't start making plays soon, this was going to be a blowout, and he decided to do a little bit of improvisation to pick up the first down. Percy's offensive line was just unfortunately really struggling to protect the quarterback, and he fumbled the ball again, giving the ball to Clemson in beautiful position. With a 23-point deficit, things were looking incredibly dire, but Percy was at least starting to get cooking a little bit, picking up another first down on a slant play. After Percy's quarterback took a horrific sack though, time was ticking down in the half with no timeouts, and he had to just catch this corner out and get out of bounds, hoping that his team could at least get a field goal. It was sadly a little bit too long for his kicker though, and this game had suddenly turned into a blowout going into the second half. And despite a good game from Percy, UNC's playoff hopes were probably cooked. He continued to do his best to fight for his team though, running nice routes and picking up yet another catch heading into the fourth quarter, almost getting up out of there with a nice juke move as well. In the fourth, Percy's coach just decided to sit him on the bench for the rest of the game. As Clemson rolled to a dominant win, their defense was just oppressive. The big problem in this game was that Percy's quarterbacks took an absurd amount of sacks, and his near 100 yards of receiving wasn't enough to make up for it. Percy was obviously happy with his role as wide receiver 1, but as he continued to improve his speed, he did kind of wish that the coaches would give him a chance in the slot. Getting the ball in space at wide receiver 1 was kind of difficult. Percy did nail his midterms for straight A's, and that freed up some time for him to focus on getting in the gym a little bit more. It was looking like the playoff hopes were probably going to have to wait for next year, and Percy was starting to experience some of the temptations of being a student athlete, but he was trying to stay the course and be a team player. Percy was actually starting to get some NIL deals. He didn't really need the money, but it was still cool to receive the attention, as overall his redshirt freshman season was going way better than he'd expected. He was just happy to get some playing time, but he'd become one of the offensive stars of the team, picking up a touchdown catch against Cal, and even though his production was pretty up and down, his coaches were really happy with him. They'd even given him some freedom to continue to improvise and call his own routes, and the team had rallied from the big loss pretty well, picking up a couple of big dubs as Percy continued to tack on receiving yards. The Heels were still definitely in the ACC championship picture if they could close out the season strong, and Percy, who had never had much luck with the ladies in high school, was starting to hang out with this girl Mackenzie, but she was constantly trying to lead him astray, asking him to go to parties past curfew, trying to get him to cheat on tests. He felt like he was doing a pretty good job with his 3.6 GPA, but when his parents checked his grades, they were furious. They were proud of him for what he'd done at the football field, but they told him that he needed to get his head in the game academically. With the way things were going for him athletically though, Percy was less and less worried about his parents' approval, and with what he was doing as a freshman, he was starting to have dreams of playing in the NFL. With 4 games still left in the season, he was the second leading receiver on the team with over 400 yards and 5 touchdown catches, and had been surprisingly sure-handed with only 1 drop on the entire season. The team did take an unfortunate loss to Stanford where they gave up 450 yards of total offense, and at this point they were going to need some magic to get into the conference title game. The ACC was actually looking really strong. Percy did manage to bump his GPA all the way up to a 3.8, and he'd become pretty friendly with his teammates, but they were starting to make fun of him for how much time he was spending in the library studying. The penultimate game of the regular season season was going to be a showdown against Duke, and Percy and the team were looking to spoil their miraculous 10-0 season. The game was weirdly a little bit of a defensive struggle early on, but Percy was able to come down with some tough catches in traffic that whenever he called for the ball, he seemed to magically just fall down for some reason. His quarterback was doing a good job of getting him the ball early though, and despite some kind of shaky route running, he was able to make it work and get some yards after the catch. This is one of the games where coach was just running the offense through him, which was pretty tiring, but Percy already had 50 yards in the second quarter. One nice thing about being at UNC was that Percy had a lot of other great receivers to complement him, and Jordan Shipp was able to finish what he started on that drive. Things were looking great going into the second half as defense was playing the game of their lives, holding a prolific Duke offense to only 3 points, and it felt like one more touchdown drive might be all that UNC needed to secure the dub, as Percy continued to rack up catches, and he noticed that some fans in the stadium were holding up signs that had his name on it for some reason. That was pretty encouraging to see, and one thing Percy had really improved over the season was his work as a possession receiver. Before he polished up his skills in high school, that hadn't been his game at all, but at UNC, even when he was double covered, he was able to come up with catches. The offense was stalling a little bit headed into the fourth quarter, and Percy wanted to come up with a catch on a critical third down, but the pressure was too much and his quarterback took a sack. Duke did happen to have one of the best edge rushers in the country. Thankfully, defense capped off the game of their lives by coming up with a clutch goal line stop, and Percy and UNC pulled off the top 25 upset at home, the biggest win of his young career so far. And Percy had pretty much literally been the only offense on his team with 15 receptions for 139 yards. He was incredibly reliable, 0 drops on the day. The final game of the season was going to be a battle against NC State, who was not having a very good season at 4-7, but rivalry games are always tough. NC State was able to pick up a field goal to take the lead early, but Percy had a good matchup on the outside and his quarterback let it fly, an absolute moonball, and he was able to get under it perfectly, not quite coming up with a touchdown, but getting down inside the 5. It was the longest play of Percy's young career, but Shipp once again stole his touchdown catch. One thing Percy had been hoping to do in this game was rack up some receiving touchdowns, and his quarterback decided to let it fly to him again. The ball was a little bit short, but Percy was once again able to get under it, coming up with a contested catch, and one of the nicest plays of his career for the touchdown. NC State was fighting pretty hard to stay in the game though, and to start out the second half, Percy got absolutely lit up coming over the middle on the slant. And after the drive stalled out, NC State was able to get another touchdown. Things were starting to look tough heading into the fourth quarter. With a 7-point lead though, defense stood tall on the next drive, and Percy was able to come up with another catch on the hole shot, making NC State use their last timeouts, but they needed one more first down, and Percy's quarterback decided to trust him, chucking it up deep to the end zone. He had the ball in his hands, but dropped it, and what could have been a game-winning play instead allowed NC State to take it into overtime. Percy was not trying to let the best game of his career turn into a nightmare, so bouncing back from the mistake, he took this drag route all the way down to the goal line, putting his team on a 1 with chance to win the game. And he wanted his coach to call a pass, but he went with a safe run play, and UNC was able to pick up the touchdown, sending the Wolfpack packing. It was a thriller of a final game in the regular season, and Percy had played absolutely out of his mind, 264 yards with a touchdown, and with that he actually broke the North Carolina single game receiving yards record. Percy didn't do quite as well in his final exams, but was able to come up with some B's and finish the season locking down ACC Offensive Player of the Week, as well as National Offensive Player of the Week. He finished the year with what his parents considered to be a very disappointing GPA of 3.6, but personally he was happy with it, and he had worked his skills up to becoming an 85 overall. Conference championship game was sadly not in the cards for Percy's redshirt freshman season. He wasn't able to win the Heisman this time around, but he did earn freshman All-ACC honors and freshman All-American honors. It was overall a really impressive second season campaign from Percy, and the team may have taken a disappointing loss in the Gasparilla Bowl, but Percy was one of the bright spots with 64 receiving yards and a touchdown. He finished the season leading the team in receiving by a mile with 75 receptions, almost 1,000 yards and 7 touchdowns. And apart from that one game against NC State where he got targeted like 20 times, only had 1 drop on the season. Percy was ultimately really happy with his first season at UNC and didn't really feel the need to transfer, even though he definitely had some good options. Alright, so headed into season 2, we actually are ranked in the preseason top 25 at number 22. In our season opener, we are once again going to be playing TCU, this time on the road. Percy absolutely lit these dudes up last season, and coach is letting him play in the slot this year. I have a feeling he's about to go crazy and getting a ton of space here on this first drive. He's going to try to take it all the way to the crib, spin it at the safety. We still got to work on the spin move just a little bit, but that's a great start. We are going to be faced with a 3rd and 7 here though, and for some reason Percy's quarterback threw that right into double coverage. We didn't even call for the ball there. That was just a terrible read. We could be in trouble on the road. Percy's at least able to get a tackle though. It is looking like our defense defense is not improved from last season at all. So we're down 14-0 in the second. Offense is going to have to get it going on this drive. Got to go finish this drive. We got a big 3rd and 10, and Percy going to improvise, turning the out route into a corner, and it works out beautifully. He toe taps for the big catch. And for some reason, coach took us off the field, but offense able to turn that into a touchdown. And with the ball in great field position here, Percy going to get the ball going upfield, and that's a big gain. I was hoping to juke out that last guy. In general, we haven't gotten as many opportunities to get sticky as I would have liked. Percy getting the ball again here on the slant route, and he's going to go to the end zone for the touchdown, his first of the season, tying this ball game up after a tough start. So we head to halftime 14-14 here. TCU gets 7 coming out of halftime though. Offense has got to keep balling, and Percy is wide open here, catching it up the seam. We're not going to be able to take it all the way, but that's a big play. Got to finish off this drive. We're going play action over the middle, and Percy has got it, taking it in for his second touchdown. Let's go. This is looking like it's going to be an elite season for number 2. And after a huge turnover from the defense, we got the ball on the goal line again, and I was trying to run a slant, got pressed up, but we were able to body up the cornerback, and Percy was able to pick up his second touchdown of the day. It was a masterclass from Percy in his sophomore debut, man. On this slant route, he was able to pick up over 200 yards. The game wasn't over yet, but with TCU running out of timeouts, Percy was able to pick up another first down. I'm not sure why his coach was still throwing it at this point, but got his team down to the goal line. And on the ensuing play, his tight end got into the flats, took it to the end zone, and that would put the cap on this one. Percy had opened up his sophomore season with an insanely dominant performance. North Carolina pulled off the comeback win. And who would have thought that a 6-foot-tall receiver could take over a game so completely? With that, Percy did in fact break his own single game receiving yards record and actually set the ACC single games reception record. That performance of course locked him down National Offensive Player of the Week. And UNC was ranked number 19 headed to a game against FCS Southeast. The Tar Heels were able to secure an easy victory, and Percy once again went crazy with 104 yards and 3 touchdowns. UNC kept it rolling with a dub against UConn that was a little bit closer than it needed to be, but Percy once again was the guy, over 100 receiving yards and a touchdown. That put UNC at number 12 in the country going into the ACC opener against Miami, and Percy was hyped up to play yet another night game in the Tar Heel Stadium. He wanted this to be a statement performance to potentially put him on the Heisman watch, and got off to a good start with a big catch on 3rd down. The game's opening drive was promising, and faced with another 3rd down, Percy was once again able to find the soft spot in the zone for a catch. It was looking like he was once again going to put this offense on his back, but trying to find the seam, his quarterback put way too much air under the ball, and the safety picked it off. And all of a sudden, Miami had all the momentum, but Percy was looking to lead his offense right back down the field. His route running had clearly improved a ton this season. He was getting way more targets. The slot was definitely a great position for Percy, but with his quarterback trusting him to go up and make a play up the seam again, it once again wound up being a pick. And the Tar Heels were in huge trouble late in the second quarter. Percy knew he had to try to make plays for his offense, and his quarterback continued throwing him the ball in dangerous positions. With just 14 seconds left in the half, Percy ran a slant on 3rd down and was able to pick up the first, but the time was ticking down. It was looking like UNC was only going to get one more play, and the ball went to Percy again, but got batted around for our quarterback's 3rd pick of the game. So despite 15 receptions and 110 yards for Percy, the team came up with 0 points. Percy wasn't done yet though, and he was determined to redouble his efforts in the second half. On this 3rd down, he ran a zig route and somehow was able to turn it into a first with his speed and acceleration. Thankfully, Gio Lopez was finally able to avoid throwing the pick and found our other receiver in the end zone, so we were finally back in the game. Defense gave us some life with a stop, and despite a little bit of pass interference on the 2nd down, Percy was still able to come up with the ball. With an absurd 17 receptions on the day, he picked up another one on the drag route, and all of a sudden, there was nothing but green grass in front of him. Percy turned on the jets. All he had to do was beat the safety, and he did just that, making some magic after the catch and giving the Tar Heels the lead at last. Miami was able to go on a long touchdown drive with just a couple minutes left in the 4th, and all of a sudden the situation was looking dire. On a 3rd and 15 though, for some reason Percy's teammate got wide open on the right side. All Gio Lopez had to do was chuck it up, and it was a touchdown. The Hurricanes had been so caught up in guarding Percy, they forgot that his running back was split out wide, and the team was headed to overtime in the ACC opener. Percy was determined to come up with a game-winning touchdown catch. On a 3rd and 2, unfortunately, he was running a drag over the middle of the field and somehow dropped this ball, so the Tar Heels had to kick a field goal in a critical situation, which sent this into a second overtime. The good news was that Miami had only gotten a field goal, so all UNC needed was 1 touchdown to end the game, and Percy got it down to the 10 here on this drag route. He was hoping to avoid taking any risks, but trying to run a zig route here on 1st down, for some reason his quarterback threw it right to the DB, and it was a game-losing interception in a game that had been full of them. An absolutely brutal way to lose in front of the home crowd. Percy had played his heart out, but deep down he blamed himself for a lot of those interceptions, and the drop on 3rd down had been critical. The media doesn't seem to agree though. They put Percy atop the Heisman watch. He wasn't even on it before that last week. The next game would be potentially the biggest of Percy's life so far. The Tar Heels were headed back on the road to take on Duke, who for some reason was #1 in the country. If the Tar Heels could pull out a victory in this one, it would put them firmly in the college football playoff picture despite the loss. But he knew that playing in the heavy rain was going to be a struggle, and his fears were confirmed when this ball bounced around and was picked off by Duke. Percy's quarterback was good at getting him the ball, but he sure did throw a lot of interceptions. Just like that, it was a 3-score deficit, but Percy was determined to make a big play, and catching the ball over the middle hit the nastiest juke move of his life, basically breaking the ankles of the entire Duke defense, and he took it all the way to the house to get the Tar Heels back in the game. Plays like that were bound to keep Percy on the Heisman watch, but Duke's offense was a little bit too dominant, and it was looking like it was going to be a rout in the 4th quarter. It was looking like the comeback bid would come up short, but Percy was at least doing his part, racking up some more big receptions and putting on some nasty juke moves as well. It turned out that Duke had their #1 ranking for a reason, and the rain certainly hadn't been a help. As far as Percy's Heisman hopes were concerned though, things were looking pretty solid. He had another near 200-yard day. We did sadly drop out of the top 25 after that. The team was able to come up with a huge bounce back win against Notre Dame though, as Percy's coach gave him a little bit of a rest against the Irish, and the wear and tear was starting to hit him just a little bit. Percy had gone from not playing football at all just a few years ago to all of a sudden touching the ball like 20 times in the game as a wide receiver. With the wear and tear that his body was already taking, Percy was already starting to think about going to the NFL as a redshirt sophomore, but he was worried about what his parents would think if he didn't finish his degree. As for North Carolina's season, it was looking like it would depend on a road game against Clemson, where the rain was unfortunately once again coming down, but Percy continued to ball out. On a 4th down and 2 early in the game though, his quarterback tried him on the drag, and somehow the ball wound up slipping through Percy's hands in the rain and turned into his second really big drop of the season. If Percy wanted to go to the NFL, those were catches that he had to make in clutch situations. After that, things were looking just a bit dire. Clemson had a 10-point lead, but Percy found some space over the middle of the field, and he knew that as soon as he got in space, he was dangerous, turning it upfield, and he would take that all the way to the crib to put North Carolina back in it. Clemson scored again though, and it was starting to look like this was going to be a shootout, but Percy had bounced back and was feeling up to the task, coming up with a big catch deep. Down on the goal line, his offense was backed up to a 3rd and goal though, and for some reason his quarterback just decided to chuck it up to the streak, which was a terrible idea, but the ball got batted around, and somehow Percy managed to come down with it for an insane touchdown catch. Clemson decided to challenge the call though, but fortunately it stood for the greatest play of Percy's career so far. If anyone had any doubt about Percy's status as a Heisman candidate, he absolutely put that to bed in the first half of this game. He wound up with 3 touchdowns and 240 receiving yards. It was pretty much an unprecedented performance. Percy was not getting a break in this one though. Defense just couldn't stop a soul, and it seemed like no matter how fast he led his offense down the field, Clemson would come right back at him. It had turned into a situation where anything short of a touchdown would end the game, and unfortunately on a 3rd and short, Percy's quarterback slipped up, threw the ball way behind him, and it turned into a killer pick. So despite having possibly the best game in college football wide receiving history, Percy's team is going to take a blowout loss. It's becoming clear that this is not a team that he can win a championship with. I mean, putting up this receiving performance and losing is actually crazy. With that game, Percy actually broke the North Carolina single season receiving records, and it was looking unlikely at this point that he'd relinquish his hold on that #1 Heisman spot. With 4 games left in the season, he already had almost 1,400 receiving yards and 14 touchdowns. When it came to the team, however, Percy was frustrated beyond belief. He and the offense put up 48 points against Pitt and still lost, and he decided that no matter what happened, this was probably going to be his last season at UNC. This feeling was strengthened when the Tar Heels got blown out of the water by Louisville, and even though he was leading on the Heisman watch, Percy had kind of checked out for the season. North Carolina finished the regular season 6-6. Because of the late season skid from the Tar Heels, Percy just barely missed out on the Heisman Trophy, but he was able to lock down the Biletnikoff Award, as well as earning first-team All-American honors. Despite the frustrations, Percy had an unbelievable season, and he had a real decision coming up of whether he should stay in college or go to the league. Ultimately, he decided that he wanted one more season to try to win a national championship, but he knew that it wouldn't be at UNC. He wanted to go somewhere with both a better offense and defense, and decided to sign with the 90+ overall LSU Tigers, hoping to have a dominant junior season and solidify his high draft grade. Going into his junior season at LSU, Percy came in at an 87 overall with elite physical abilities. After the team picked up a few easy dubs in non-conference games against FCS and G5 opponents, it was time for Percy and the boys to take on their first big challenge in Miami at home. Interestingly enough, Percy's coaches had decided to put him at outside receiver to start the game. They had told him that he'd be moving back and forth between positions throughout the season, and he was actually having a little bit of trouble getting open early, so the LSU offense was struggling in the first half. Headed down to the red zone though, he was determined to make a play, and his quarterback found him perfectly over the middle in stride, and Percy had his first touchdown as an LSU Tiger. That helped to spark this offense, and it was a little bit weird getting used to a new quarterback, but he and Percy were slowly starting to develop a connection, and so far things were going pretty well. After a big catch over the middle, they went back to the play action, and Percy's teammate was able to get open for a touchdown to make it a 2-score lead. The best part about Percy's new team so far was that the defense was so much better than North Carolina's, and looking for a big play, Percy's quarterback found him on the hole shot, and Percy somehow made a man miss as this one went all the way to the crib, and Percy was having a monster second half. Still hanging on to a 2-score lead, LSU had a big third down on the ensuing drive, but Percy came up with a clutch catch over the middle. It ended up being a massive win in front of the home crowd, and Percy absolutely balled out with 209 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns. Percy's big performance earned him his first National Offensive Player of the Week of the year. Next game was the SEC opener against fellow unbeaten Tennessee, and the team picked up a huge win clutching up in the fourth quarter, as Percy had another great game with 75 yards. Game 6 would be another tough one though, as LSU headed on the road to take on Kentucky, and the Wildcats were having their best season in a while. Percy knew he was going to have to ball out in this one and called for the ball covered early on, as his quarterback trusted him and he actually came down with the catch. The drive stalled out though, and Kentucky was able to tack on a touchdown, so things were looking tricky with a 2-score deficit in the first half. The team needed to score before halftime, and Percy was doing a little bit of freestyling to try to provide it, continuing to find soft spots in the defense. With a couple timeouts left, the Tigers still had plenty of time on the clock, so they were able to go over the middle of the field to Percy as he caught it in stride and powered forward for his first touchdown catch of the game, tying it up. Unfortunately, Percy got a little bit dinged up on that play, so he had to sit out for a lot of the third quarter, and the team was trailing by 3 headed to the fourth. With just over a couple minutes left, LSU had a big 3rd and goal, and Percy clutched up, coming open on the slant and making the catch over the middle, but defense still had to provide one more stop, and sadly they weren't able to do it. Kentucky marched right down to score, and Percy's quarterback saw him late on the curl route and threw a brutal pick 6, effectively ending the game for the Tigers. So the Tigers sadly took their first loss of the season, but Percy had another great game, coming down with 174 yards and 2 touchdowns. Halfway through the season, it was looking like it'd be another dominant year for Percy, but while his team was still in the top 10, he didn't make an appearance on the Heisman watch. The team was able to bounce back with a big win against Mississippi State, and the blowout put them back up at number 6 in the country as Percy put up 3 touchdowns and 110 yards. The offense kept it rolling with another massive dub, this time over Auburn, and Percy didn't lead the team in receiving yards but still had 58 and a touchdown. It was looking like if Percy and LSU didn't take another loss, they were headed to the college football playoff for sure. It was all going to come down to the big game against Georgia, as it was a number 1 versus number 2 matchup in Death Valley, and hoping to have the best game of his life, Percy started it out with a beautiful comeback route where he picked up 9 yards, and he was off to the races, getting the ball on the next play as well on a little RPO, and almost juking his way out of there for an even bigger gain. But Georgia's 99 defense was tough to move against, and after a couple of stops they pounced with a touchdown. The Tigers offense needed to come up with something before halftime, and Percy was doing everything he could to get open, as it was going to come to a tricky 3rd and 4, as Percy served as a decoy, getting his teammate open, and the dude who stole his number 2 got the touchdown. And Percy's defense was playing lights out, and that brought a defensive half to a close. It was looking like a rock fight going into the second half, but with the Tigers on a drive, Percy picked up a clutch catch on 3rd down. I'm not exactly sure why his quarterback threw that ball. That put the Tigers back down on the goal line, and on 3rd and goal, Percy's quarterback actually threw him the ball on a hitch, but he somehow managed to lose yards, and his team had to settle for a field goal. That seemed like a a big missed opportunity, but defense was playing so well, they put the LSU offense pretty much right back in field goal range. All the team needed was a couple more big plays from Percy, and he was covered on third down, but his quarterback still chucked the ball for him, and he was able to pick it up. It was going to come down to goal line offense, and Percy's quarterback went over the middle of the field, picking up a huge touchdown. LSU's defense had just been too much for Georgia to handle. Georgia was able to get a field goal to make it a one-score game, and they had LSU nervous on a third down, but Percy picked up a gutsy catch, powering forward after coming down with the curl route. That was enough to push the Tigers over the edge, and there was a new number 1 team in college football, as Percy had a quietly dominant game with 21 catches. The boys were able to finish the season off with another win against Texas, although it was a pretty close one, and Percy once again had a dominant game with 116 receiving yards. Going into the conference championship game, it was looking like he probably wasn't going to win the Heisman. On top of the season going great, Percy had dominated his easy classes at LSU, which was a much easier academic school than UNC. Sadly, the team wasn't able to beat Georgia 2 times in a row in the SEC championship, but it was looking like the Tigers would still get a bye in the playoffs. Percy sadly once again just barely missed out on the Heisman Trophy, and I honestly don't know how this dude won it. And surprisingly, he wasn't even a first-team All-American. But it didn't matter that much to him because LSU had gotten a great draw in the playoffs, and it was looking like Percy and his team had a chance to go all the way. He was able to upgrade to a 93 overall before the start of the first playoff game. After playing against a full SEC schedule, FIU actually seemed like it was going to be a little bit of a break for this LSU team, but they were able to get Percy and the boys to a 3rd and long. Thankfully, they played man coverage though, and he was able to get wide open for an easy gain on the slant route. And on 1st and goal, coach called a comeback route for him, which was kind of a weird call on the goal line, but it worked out and he got into the end zone for a touchdown. FIU was able to get a touchdown to respond, but they were giving Percy too much room to work, and he was able to cook, getting up out into open space with the juke move. And the Panthers might have been a solid fundamental football team, but they just didn't have the guys to cover up Percy. Shockingly though, the defense that had dominated the SEC all season had given up 17 points, but Percy was determined that this not be a Cinderella story for FIU, this time catching the ball on the post route and proving to be very hard to take down as he got into the end zone again. It was a closer game than the boys had hoped, but it was dominant so far for Percy. When he got a step on the safety on a deep ball, his quarterback just chucked it up, and Percy somehow got under an absolute moon ball and escaped the defense, giving the Tigers a 2-score lead. And at that point, the announcers were starting to compare him to Jamar Chase. He and his quarterback were dominating on the same level that Chase and Joe Burrow had, and with great protection, he was putting the ball perfectly on the money, helping Percy pick up big gains. And late in the 4th quarter, it didn't really make that much sense to throw, but Percy was near 400 yards, so they fed him the ball anyway for yet another touchdown. And ended up looking like more of a blowout than it really was. And if Percy had put up a performance like this against an SEC defense, he definitely would have won the Heisman Trophy. That obviously shattered the LSU single-game receiving yards record, and it also broke the national single-game receptions record. All in all, Percy broke about 8 different records total, including the SEC single-season reception number, but the job had just gotten started. Thankfully, Percy wouldn't have to play Georgia a 3rd time, as UCLA surprisingly took care of them in the quarterfinals. And this game got off to a great start for the Tigers. Their defense was able to force a pick 6 and then get a stop on the next drive. But for some reason, Percy's quarterback decided to throw the ball into quite literally, like, what would we even call this, septuple coverage, and it got batted away. So that was an interesting start to the offensive performance, and it sadly got more interesting from there, as once again, Percy didn't call for the ball, and it seemed like his quarterback was maybe forgetting how to read a defense a little bit. So much of this offense over the course of the season had just been to throw the ball up to Percy, but he was able to find him again here for a nice gain. And on 2nd and 1, that whole chuck it up to Percy thing came into full effect, because this was not open at all, and somehow Percy came down with the catch. Remember, our boy's only 6 feet tall, so those contested catches are extra impressive, and Percy had an easier one on 2nd and goal to come down with the touchdown. UCLA was not going down without a fight though, as they got a touchdown, and Colton Joseph, the LSU quarterback, was having a terrible day. He threw another pick 6, and suddenly the Bruins had the lead. It felt like Percy was kind of going against his own team in this game, and on this play, that literally happened, as he almost juked out for a touchdown but got tackled by his own fellow wide receiver. And things were looking dire going into the 2nd half, but Percy was able to get loose again on the slant route as his cornerback didn't even touch him, and he made it a 1-score game. The mighty LSU defense had begun to crumble in the playoffs though. Late in the 3rd quarter, UCLA had 35 points, and Percy's quarterback was just panic chucking the ball to him. It was for sure a great game for Percy, but when he tried to sit down in the hole to cover 2 on this play, play, his quarterback threw it right to the safety, and it looked like a potential dagger for this game. But defense was able to get the ball right back going into the fourth quarter, and Percy was fighting hard to keep his team in the game even with his blocking. The Tigers were backed up to their last stand on 4th and 15, and they tried to throw it up to Percy, but he couldn't quite come down with it. His team had asked so much of him, and he couldn't quite deliver in that moment. So the LSU Tigers fell just short of a semifinal win. It was a disappointing result for sure. Percy had once again played his heart out and had gotten the only 2 touchdowns of the day for this offense. But with that, he broke the SEC single season receiving record. He had finished the year with an absurd 1,900 yards and 17 touchdowns, and was looking like a potential first-round pick in the NFL draft. He ultimately decided to declare for the draft. After a solid showing at the combine, Percy had to wait a little bit before he got drafted, but he did end up eventually getting a call midway through the first round by the Denver Broncos. They picked him up with the 20th pick, and it looked like he was going to be headed to play with Bo Nix. And Percy was sad that he went so late in the round, but he felt like it was a good fit for him. He'd made his parents happy by graduating with flying colors, and he proved that choosing the route that he did was worth it. He signed an $18 million rookie contract with the Broncos. Percy was set to be back where he was most comfortable at slot receiver, and the Broncos ended up having an exceptional year in his rookie season, making it to the wildcard round of the playoffs, as Percy had an elite rookie season with over 1,000 receiving yards and 13 touchdowns, pretty much matching what he did in college. The Broncos were able to come up with a slim win in the first round, as Percy had a couple catches in that game, nothing major, and also managed to squeak out a win against the Bills in the second round. In that one, Percy had an even better game, coming down with 55 receiving yards, and that took Denver to the conference championship against the Ravens, and they picked up another clutch win to make it to the Super Bowl against the Packers. Percy had heated up as the playoffs went on, and after failing to win a championship in college, he was determined to get one as a rookie in his first Super Bowl appearance. The offenses were both looking strong in this game early on, and Bo Nix, coming off of an MVP season, looked confident to run the ball to Percy. And our boys getting off to a great start in this game, running a little slant route here, and picking up the first down to get down inside the 15 for the Broncos. And the Broncos made their way down to the goal line, going with an RPO and running it straight up the middle for the touchdown. The offense was continuing to ball out, and on an ensuing first down, Percy for some reason got a free release into the back of the defense, and Bo Nix threw an absolutely insane pass that literally hung up in the air like a punt. Percy came down under it and he wasn't able to score, but he made a huge play for his offense. His coach decided to reward him down on the goal line though, and ran an RPO right to him, as Percy was having one of his best games of the season and gave the Broncos a 2-score lead. And going into the fourth quarter, it seemed like the Broncos were going to run away with it. Percy continued to come up with big catches over the middle of the field. With time ticking down, Bo Nix threw up a moonball to the other receiver, and even though it was a pass interference, he somehow dunked on the cornerback. That was enough to wrap up the Super Bowl with a dub, and Percy had finally won his championship. He finished as the leading receiver in the Super Bowl with over 100 yards and a touchdown, capping off a spectacular rookie season. After the Super Bowl win, Percy spent another 2 years in the NFL, where he racked up another couple thousand receiving yards and established himself as one of the most reliable receivers in the league. During his final season with the Broncos though, he dealt with some head injuries and decided that it was best for him to medically retire from football and move on to other life experiences. And that is going to be it for this one, guys. Let me know if you enjoyed this style of video. Appreciate you if you watched this far. Be sure to drop a like and comment, and I'll see you in the next one.